previous video has explained what a stakeholder is and why it is so important to engage stakeholders in your research. In this video, we will explain the crucial steps for engaging stakeholders effectively and provide some examples of using this process in research. We will also explain some of the common pitfalls at each step of the process and how to address them. Let's begin with a quick overview of the stakeholder engagement process. The first step is to identify and define the goals and expected outcomes of the engagement. It is best to do this step while you are planning your project and allocate time and resources accordingly. Next, you may begin to identify and recruit the stakeholders that are necessary to meet the defined goals. The third step is to develop detailed plans for the engagement strategy that best fits the needs of your project. Once your strategy has been thoroughly planned, it is time to conduct the engagement. Following the engagement activities, it is important to consider the resulting outcomes, knowledge, opinions, and data shared that decide the best way to utilize them to meet the goals of engagement. Lastly, you should reflect and revise your engagement approaches to inform future stakeholder activities. It is important to note here that stakeholder engagement is a cycle and may be completed multiple times throughout the duration of a research project. It may also be utilized after a research project is completed to maintain trust between key stakeholders and researchers. Trust is a crucial piece of stakeholder engagement and can be formed at every step of the process. We will discuss the concept of trust and helpful tips for how to build trust between stakeholders and researchers in our last video. Considerations and resources.
The first step of the stakeholder engagement process is to identify the goals for engagement. The goals of engagement will help define the necessary stakeholders needed. There are typically three main goals in engaging stakeholders: communication, consultation, and deliberation or co-creation. The goal of communication-based engagement is to inform stakeholders of research and decisions or to improve knowledge or awareness of an issue. This type of engagement is a one-way flow of information from researchers to stakeholders. It may be used in a variety of situations where risks are simple or minimal. This type of engagement is appropriate when you want to educate a specific audience or when results have been analyzed and are ready to be disseminated. The goal of consultation-based engagement is to collect input from stakeholders regarding views, attitudes, perceptions, concerns, needs, and suggestions. It too is a one-way flow of information, but consultation means stakeholders are sharing information with researchers. Consultation-based engagement may be used in many situations, including when stakeholder views are unknown or when power dynamics and relationships between stakeholders need to be assessed before bringing together groups of stakeholders in co-creation setting. The goal of deliberation-based engagement is to collaborate with stakeholders to create solutions or knowledge together. This type of engagement is a two-way flow of information between the stakeholders and researchers in which they exchange ideas and experiences. It may be used in situations where the issue is complex or uncertain and requires knowledge from many different types of stakeholders. It may also be used in situations where the outputs of the project require end-user acceptance or policy outcomes.
Once you have established your goals, you are able to identify the stakeholders necessary to meet those goals. Identifying stakeholders should be deliberate and robust to ensure that all of the important stakeholders are represented in your engagement efforts, not just those who can make decisions or who support your work. A diversity of perspectives is important to test researcher assumptions, ensuring all relevant issues are being addressed and can help avoid unintended outcomes. There are many methods for identifying stakeholders, and they may be used individually or in combination. For example, identify criteria that will help meet the goals of the project and ensure that you have diverse perspectives. These criteria can include stakeholder locations, areas of expertise, interests, degree of influence, among other criteria. You can create a checklist of the types of stakeholders or criteria you need for your project. For example, you may want representatives from industry, academia, and government to participate in your engagement activity. and so a checklist helps ensure that these stakeholder groups are included. You can allow stakeholders to volunteer themselves for engagement activities by signing up through posters, announcements, or advertisements. Sometimes the best networks to identify stakeholders are other stakeholders and experts. They may have connections to individuals with specific expertise that will help further engagement efforts. You may use peer-reviewed articles or census data to identify stakeholders that have the knowledge and experience that you need to effectively conduct your engagement. After stakeholder participants are identified for your engagement, the next step is to recruit them to participate in the engagement activity. Reaching out to stakeholders should be done with thought and care. Depending on the type of engagement and its use in your research, you may need to submit your project for IRB approval at your institution, as it may be considered human subject research. IRB can also help guide outreach materials to ensure that they are ethical. For more information, visit your institution's IRB webpage or our written guidance documents. As you begin to reach out to your stakeholders, you should consider the ways in which you can encourage participation. Let's discuss some things to consider as you develop recruitment materials. Thinking about your engagement activity and the stakeholders you want to reach out to, it is important to think about the time and effort it is going to take participants to be involved. A social media post meant to educate your stakeholders will be quick to view and understand, but a multi-day workshop meant to co-create ideas will take more time and effort from stakeholders. When reaching out to stakeholders, you should be clear and transparent about your needs and expectations of their participation, so that they may make an informed decision whether they have the time and resources to participate. Depending on the time and effort needed to participate in the engagement activity, you may also want to offer incentives like gift cards, food, raffles, travel reimbursements, accommodations, childcare, and more. It is a best practice to provide food and accommodations for multi-day events where stakeholders may need to travel to a common location. The goal of incentives should be to meet the needs of stakeholders and encourage participation. In reaching out to stakeholders, you should be aware of cultural norms. For example, although many individuals have access to the internet, not all have access to or are comfortable navigating online information. Understanding your target audience is important to deciding how you distribute outreach materials. You may consider mail, posters, or flyers, or using community spaces to reach out to stakeholders. It is important to understand the most effective and respectful ways to communicate with the stakeholder groups you are trying to reach. We will discuss more considerations to build trust in our last video of this series.
The next step in the engagement process is to choose and develop an engagement activity. This step may also be done prior to reaching out to participants. Let's take a look at each type of engagement and the considerations necessary to conduct a successful engagement activity. To share information with stakeholders in the form of communication-based engagement, researchers can develop activities such as science museum exhibits, media campaigns, information sessions, cooperative extension activities, and conferences. When developing these materials, it is helpful to include both background information on the issue, how it affects stakeholders, and ways that stakeholders may take action to address the issue. Communication-based engagement can be simple, such as short information session or as complex as an extensive, well-researched social media campaign. Developing the needs and limitations of the project, communication-based engagement can be a helpful tool. If done effectively, this type of engagement may also establish you or your organization as a trusted source of information on the issue you're researching, helping to build trust between stakeholders and researchers. Consultation-based engagement can include surveys, interviews, focus groups, and listening sessions. When conducting these consultation-based engagement activities, it's helpful to include trained professionals to help with planning, facilitation, and analysis phases. Finding the best type of consultation-based engagement for your project depends on the time, resources, and goals of the project. Surveys will reach a large audience, but collect only a limited amount of data from participants. Interviews and focus groups may collect more in-depth data from subjects, but usually involve fewer participants. Deliberation or co-creation based engagement can include collaborative working groups, conferences, advisory boards, and partnerships. At the STEP Center, we are committed to providing convergent solutions to phosphorus issues. Co-creation activities are an essential part of creating convergent solutions. In many cases, deliberation-based activities take the most time, effort, and resources to effectively complete, but they can also produce the most meaningful results that lead to the most effective outcomes. You may use one or a combination of these strategies to develop the best engagement plan for your project. Our next section will provide some considerations as you develop and implement your engagement plans.
The last piece of the stakeholder engagement process is a reflection on the engagement you planned and conducted. In this section, we will talk about some questions the research team should ask themselves as they go through the engagement process. Let's begin with the first step in the engagement cycle, formation of goals. In this step, researchers should ask themselves questions like, do the goals we have identified meet the needs of the project? And are the goals of the project reflective of the needs of stakeholders? Using these questions, you should begin to think about what goals are going to best fit the needs. Not every project can simply use education and outreach to effectively engage stakeholders, and may require more involvement from stakeholders to solve wicked sustainability problems. Along with these questions, you may also reflect on common challenges and pitfalls and work to create mitigation strategies. Some of the common challenges and pitfalls researchers experience include not clearly defining goals and objectives for engagement, not sufficiently factoring in time and resources, not clarifying what outcomes will look like for the engagement process. And during the first step of the process, you should reflect on these challenges and ensure that goals are clearly defined, time and resources are considered, and there is a plan for intended outcomes of the project. The next steps involve identifying and recruiting stakeholders. Here, you should be asking yourself questions such as, what or whose knowledge is needed to meet the goals and objectives of the project? And do the stakeholders we have identified represent the diversity of those who are affected by or who may have an impact on the issue or research? During this step, it is crucial to reflect on the common challenges and pitfalls to ensure that you are including a diversity of perspectives. Common challenges and pitfalls include not including a well-thought-out method for identifying and recruiting stakeholders, inviting the usual suspects that may exclude marginalized communities or important groups, not making recruitment materials easily understandable by the target audience, using technical jargon or unclear instructions, not considering the time and effort required from stakeholders to participate in the engagement, and not being clear and transparent about what is expected from stakeholders in the recruitment materials. Next in the engagement cycle is choosing and conducting your engagement activity, which includes reflecting on questions such as, are we providing a safe environment for stakeholders to share their experiences and perspectives? Do the engagement activities we have selected meet the goals of the project? Did we give all stakeholders an equal opportunity to participate and share their perspectives? And did we effectively build trust between the research team and the stakeholders involved? Along with these questions, here are some of the challenges and pitfalls during this part of the engagement process. Not effectively communicating with stakeholders throughout engagement activities, poor activity design that does not factor in stakeholder needs, and not ensuring ethical practices, including submitting for IRB approval when necessary. Overall, it is important to take a moment throughout the engagement process to encourage reflection and mitigate common challenges. Following your engagement, it is also important to give stakeholders the opportunity to reflect on engagement efforts. It may be helpful to send a survey to participants to allow for feedback. Participants will have valuable knowledge to improve stakeholder engagement efforts in the future. These reflective efforts can also help reduce bias and increase the validity of your outcomes. Our last video will build on concepts described in this video, discussing other considerations and resources for successful engagement.